Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. Today's guest is Radhika Duggal. Radhika is currently the Chief Marketing Officer of none other than the MLS. Radhika walked David and I through her entire career so far, detailing how she started out in the management consulting world before moving into larger organizations like Pfizer and Chase, then into the startup scene, and ultimately why she made the jump to not only the sports industry, but more specifically, our beloved soccer. This episode is a true masterclass in marketing and all things sports business, but it is so much more. Radhika walked us through things like how she navigated her career journey, how and where she fits her career into her overall life, and just so much more. I could go on and tease you further about what to expect in this episode, but I will get right into it and let Radhika and her story do all of the talking. So, with that said, let's start this wonderful episode. Okay, good morning, Radhika. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. So, of course, we now know a bit about you. We have done some digging, some research on you, your background, and obviously, of course, your current role, which we'll let you explain. But for anyone who is listening who maybe hasn't heard of you before, isn't familiar with who you are, can you just kick us off with giving a quick run through of who you are as a person, and then sort of segueing into what your career has looked like so far?
Absolutely. So thank you again for having me. My name is Radhika Duggal, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Major League Soccer. And thinking about who I am as a person, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm a wife. And when we think about who we are holistically, those are my most important jobs. And I'm very careful, and we can talk about this in more detail, to balance those most important jobs with the job I have the privilege of doing here at Major League Soccer. And I think it's really important to note that where you start from a career perspective is not where you end up, very clearly, and I am a prime example of that. So I've had the opportunity to work across three very different kinds of roles, and never in sports, and yet here I am. I've worked as a management consultant for about a third of my career. I worked in very large companies, JP Morgan and Pfizer, the actual opposite of sports, for about a third of my career, and at two fintech startups for the other third of my career. And I'll say that those experiences, though industries are very different from where I am today, those experiences were very foundational to me, and quite frankly, they help me every day. I've learned, I think, two very important things that carry me through day to day here. One is about building a culture of care. We started talking about who I am as a person. Well, every person I have the opportunity to work with is a person. And for my team in particular, making sure they understand that we all care for each other, and that is our primary job, is really important to me and authentic to my leadership style. So how do we do that? We do that with meaningful ways to connect with each other. We have a monthly all hands meeting, which means every person on the team gets in a room. We've outgrown one room, so now we use two rooms, and it's its own thing. But we talk about, first of all, we celebrate each other. We celebrate the wins. We give people little awards and prizes. We talk about the progress and the work. We have a marketing leadership team meeting every week. I do office hours for about 2.5 hours every month, where anyone on the team can sign up for 15-minute slots. We do this thank you thing on Thursdays where we write handwritten thank you notes to each other. We do quarterly happy hour. All of that to say, the thing I've learned from working in those different places, and that's incredibly applicable here, is work is about our people. It's about the people we have the opportunity to work with, and the people we have the opportunity to serve, our clubs and our players. And building that culture of care is the single most important lesson that I've learned in my career and in my personal life.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's been a big theme on the club level from everyone we've spoken with, the presidents, C-suite folk, owners we've had on. that it always circles back to the people. It's not what's just happening on the field. It's not just the food and beverage revenue and everything that comes with running these sort of organizations, but it's all about people coming together as a collective and sort of focused on this one goal together. So it's amazing to hear that is the same case in the MLS. We spoke with Jeremy Allenbo from USL Championship, and it's the same sort of theme of it's all about the team, And so where along, your career, where have you pulled from to sort of craft your own leadership style? A big thing we always like to ask about is, past leaders and role models and influencers in people's previous roles that have maybe when they weren't leaders themselves, and sort of pulling from good leaders above. Can you just chat a bit about where you've sort of gotten your ideas or your own ideas from?
Absolutely. I think actually that's the whole thing. There's so much value in my mind in having a diverse career because you learn, first of all, you have access. In many cases, if you're fortunate, to incredibly good leaders. And by the way, you also might live through some less ideal leaders as well, but you learn in both situations. And I would say I've been so lucky. I worked with world-class leaders at Deloitte. That was my first job. I spent about 6 years there. My first senior manager is today still a friend. In fact, we're having brunch in a week and a half. He made such an impression on me and taught me about this culture of care, taught me about this culture of teaching and mentorship, because that's what he did with myself as well as another couple of folks. We were literally like fresh out of college. We'd never worked anywhere. It was our first job, our first project. And he took 3 of us and said, hey, I'm gonna help you learn how to be a working professional. And thank God he did that. So I would say first job, first project, first leader, I had an incredible experience. And I would say I've been really lucky in almost every role I've had at least one really strong leader. And in some cases, I had less strong leaders, but I learned a ton by watching what did they do that felt less effective to me and being really mindful and intentional to remember how that felt. So you don't remember the stuff you did day to day. In fact, I'm like terrible at this. I think about the old jobs I had and I'm like, I know I did a lot of things, but I don't know what they were, but I remember how I felt. So I try to be mindful to think about why did I feel this way? What drove that? And really try to emulate the incredible leaders I've had the opportunity to work with that helped to build me up, and really try not to do the things that were less productive.
Yeah, that is something I was, I think assuming based on, just seeing your sort of journey and trajectory, just based on your LinkedIn profile, of just where you've come from, where you've started and where you are now. I had the assumption that it's been very intentional, very purposeful moves in different roles and different industries. And a big piece that we always love to kind of bring it back to right at the beginning is before work ever started. So going all the way back to childhood, upbringing, the influences that people have had before they even started thinking about management consulting and all of these career journeys. So take us back to your early days of, growing up. What did childhood look like for you? Did sports play any kind of role in your life? Because obviously we'll circle it all back to the MLS now, but take us back to pre-work and sort of who you were kind of as a child, what you maybe thought you were going to do when you were 10 years old and someone asks you, what do you want to be when you're older? Take us back to all of that before, Deloitte was even in your life.
I feel like there are 3 questions in that. So I'm going to start with
There
this
is. Sorry.
one. Totally fine. Totally fine. I'm going to start with the sports one. Then I'm going to talk about the like early influences. And then I'll talk about like the what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah.
And we'll see if we get to all 3. So I will say, like so many people, I grew up in a household that actually really valued sports. I grew up upstate New York, so on the border between Western Pennsylvania and Western New York. Um, and it wasn't a particularly developed town or place, but everybody played sports. Um, And so I played basketball poorly. I played in a boys' league. There was no girls' league. I was terrible, like absolutely terrible. No one would pass me the ball, and rightly so. I learned a lot: humility, teamwork, knowing what you're not good at. That in itself is a skill. I played softball. As kids, we would go to minor league baseball games in our hometown and get, and very infrequently, given money and time, we would sometimes even get to go to professional sports, particularly Yankees games. I think that grounding in sports as a child means you learned so many of the critical life lessons that actually carry you through day to day in both life and career. Being a team player, handling victory well, but more importantly, handling defeat constructively, like losing and losing well, and learning how to handle your emotions. And most importantly, grit and hustle and determinations. We would play it's some double headers and sometimes triple header softball games in like the dead of summer, and it would be 80 degrees and you're out there for 3 games, and those baseball games are long, right? So that hustle and that determination, I think sports is incredibly important, especially for children, even if they're not, like I wasn't great at them. And I'm really hopeful that my daughter, who's 4, will, she does gymnastics, she does soccer, she does ballet, she wants to do basketball. I hope she finds something she loves and sticks with. That said, I think what really influenced me much, much more than playing sports was watching my parents, who were immigrants in the 70s. They modeled risk taking, they modeled this unmatched hard work and this focus in a way that I think is very inspirational. My mom stocked shelves at Kmart. My dad worked 2 jobs, one of which was his day job, which was a professional career like we have. But in the second, he was a convenience store owner. And he'd go there at nights and weekends, and we'd go with him. And I just think a lot about this idea of risk taking. He actually risked everything to buy that store, meaning like second mortgage on the house kind of risk. The skill of unmatched hard work and the focus on saying, I got to get from here to here. What are the things I need to do along the way? And most importantly, what can I not do? Because I have to get from here to here. I have to. It's not a choice. And those are the three things: risk taking, hard work, focus, I want to model for my daughter. I'm going to pause. I know there's a third question and I can answer it, but I'll pause to see if you want to dig into any of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, again, that has been something we've heard a few times from people who have really reached the top of, clubs. I think Tim McDermott from Philadelphia Union was touching on the influence of his parents being extremely hardworking. We've heard that a handful of times from people who, like yourself, have achieved really great things so far in their career. Beyond, I was actually talking with a colleague yesterday about the difference between sort of leading with words and leading by example, and sort of just doing the work, and that speaks for itself. And it sounds like your parents have had that very much of an influence of like doing the work and that sort of being contagious. But are there any lessons, advice that your mom or dad have given you verbally, that they've actually given you, that has really stuck with you and maybe been something that you've consciously or subconsciously, taken into your career as you've navigated, life as an adult, and not just, being the kid of your parents?
Yeah. My dad always says, never give up. Super simple. Sounds super generic. But some days, like you want to give up. I think a lot about being a parent. Some days I'm like, oh, I gotta go to work. It's 12 hours. I'm not with my kid. Is that the right thing? And it is the right thing because I like this job. It brings me joy. I love the impact I get to have, but I can't give up at it. And I think there's this concept of like, if you have that as your talk track in the back of your mind, you can get through. Obviously, the ups are like the high notes are great, but you can get through the downswing. And by the way, he's always around, and I can just call him and he will just tell me that. And I think that is an incredibly magical thing. That is something that I am really, really fortunate to have.
And then getting back into the other 2 questions that were within that question.
Yeah.
So you have sports as part of your childhood, which is great, and all of the lessons that you spoke about and other things, like accountability, all of the things you learn as, playing in sports as a kid and getting older. when you were, let's say 10, 12, before you maybe do start thinking about, okay, what I actually maybe want to do, what did young Radhika think that life would look like for her when she's an adult?
So I actually have this piece of paper from the 8th grade where the ask of us 8th graders was to write out, what do I want to be when I grow up? And my classmates wrote things like teacher and mother and whatever, like very clear jobs. I wrote, I want to do something that's creative and fun, something with people, and something that changes every day. I didn't write like an actual job or career. And in a lot of ways, I think that describes marketing very clearly. It is creative and fun. My entire job is working with people. By the way, like the thing I get the privilege of marketing is people, our incredible players, our incredible athletes, their clubs, and it changes every day. So I think 8th grade Radhika, so what 13-year-old Radhika had a lot of foresight. That said, I don't think I'm grown up yet. I have no idea what I really want to be when I grow up. And I think that question is actually, it's a really hard thing. And I think it's sort of something that plagues my generation, particularly women. Like when you talk about what you want to be when you grow up, you typically talk about your career, and that ties our identities to work. I always have to remind myself I'm so much more than my job. I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm a wife. And those are actually also the things that are creative and fun. They deal with people and they change every day.
Absolutely. I don't think we've actually asked that question before, but that certainly wasn't any sort of response that I would have expected. The foresight that you had, that it wasn't to your point of just tying to, I want to be, kind of thinking of maybe when I was younger, my friends, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be in the army.
Exactly.
But it was no, I want something challenging, something creative. So at what point did marketing then become the thing that you knew you wanted to hone in on? What was it that tipped that point from all of the 13-year-old ideas to when you're getting older and marketing is this sort of ticks all these boxes that I sort of set for myself years ago?
I think I somewhat fell into it. So I attended an undergraduate business school. So I went to Stern, which is NYU's business school. Um, and it was an amazing, amazing experience. But one of the things that was true then, it's less true now, but it was true then, is there were like 6 or 8 majors only. And they were things like actuarial sciences, finance, economics. Not that those things aren't creative and interesting, but they weren't creative and interesting in the way that I wanted them to be. I love writing. I love reading. You couldn't go to Stern and be a literature major, like just wasn't a choice, right? By design of what the school was. But there was marketing. That felt to me like the most creative major I could choose. So I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue that thing because that seems like the only option. And I was also really fortunate. I worked all 4 years of college, like internships and things like that. And I said, okay, I'm going to major in marketing. So I'm going to get an undergraduate marketing internship. And I wound up with a market research internship. And it was awesome. It was about people. It was about understanding how consumers behaved. And I fell in love immediately. So 13-year-old Radhika went to college, became 18-year-old Radhika. Someone just gave me a shot to do a really cool job. And I realized I loved it. It was really a really fortunate, going to school in a city in which you could intern every semester or every year in addition to the summer. It was really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's good. My older brother actually did his MBA at Stern as well, so very familiar with everything.
He was in my class. I teach at Stern now.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Maybe Stephen Cunningham, if that name
Oh,
rings a bell. He was, I believe, his MBA was marketing. He's definitely works in marketing at American Express, but
that's
um,
awesome. A
yeah,
wonderful outcome.
maybe you bumped into each other.
Maybe.
Um, Going sort of, before we really get into all things MLS, when it comes to setting the technical expertise aside, everything you had learned in your undergraduate degree, in your internships, in your early roles, again, going back to the journey you've had up until now and making, changes of companies, industries, what have been some of the key attributes of yourself that you would really associate your growth with beyond just being good at what you do, but actually Radhika as a person that has allowed you to make these trajectory moves?
I'd say a couple of things. I'd say first and foremost, be open to learning. As you mentioned, I've worked in really different industries, so that means you have to actually learn the industry every time you choose a new one, which is a really different path to take than someone who's worked in the same industry and knows it from the ground up, inside out. I have to learn, and by the way, it's particularly relevant in my role today. And so for me, I think the biggest thing is being open to learning from your team, from peers in the industry and in the company, from leaders, from the most junior person around. Be open to learning from everyone because, at least for me, it's very clear that every person around me has something to teach me, and I can benefit from closing my mouth and listening. I think the other sort of things that have helped me get really anywhere are some of the things we talked about before. Take a risk, right? It's in reality, it's a risk for me to be here. I worked in financial services and healthcare primarily. What am I doing here? That's a risk. They took a risk on me, but I took a risk on joining. Um, and I really, really take to heart that lesson my parents taught me, which is you take calculated risks, and then you have hustle, grit, and determination to make it work. So I'd say that those are probably the other two things that I really try to apply in each phase of my life. And again, as I think about like, who do I want to be? My entire frame of reference is that a person I want my daughter to be when she grows up? And yeah, I want her to be open to learning. I want her to be open to risk taking. And I want her to work really hard at whatever it is she chooses to do.
That's awesome. And then just one thing we've kind of spoken about throughout the call so far is kind of the theme behind everything is a lot of self-reflection and going back and looking at those themes and key aspects of previous leaders, previous versions of yourself, and taking from them what you can do to make yourself better going forward. Just one thing I wanted to ask was how it obviously seems important to you, but as you're much further in your career now than you were however many years ago, how often do you do that now versus then? And then also, how do you preach that to your staff as well, since I know you're trying to help them become better professionals?
So I would say self-reflection is a thing you have to have time for. And as I have the privilege of having more and more and more things in my life, you have less time, right? So you just have to be more and more intentional about making time. So I'd say for me now versus when I was, like 10 years ago, the way I think about self-reflection now is do it in the moment. If I'm like trying to block off an hour to do anything that is about thinking, and it is, I have like essentially, my husband laughs at me, but I have like a couple of priorities in life and I literally do nothing else. I'm very, very focused on those three things. If I'm trying to block off time to do this other thing, like it just won't happen. So what I do today is I have this, like I have a file on my, in my Google Drive. And as I learn things that are worth remembering, that are worth repeating, that I think are key lessons, I type them, put them there, and I use that as a way to go back every so often and say, okay, what I'm in this tricky situation. What have I learned in the past 6 months that will help me figure out how to solve it? So I think there is something about making sure you're learning in the moment, and nobody has a ton of time. So trying to make sure you're efficient in the reflection. I think the other thing is my husband has in my opinion, an incredibly demanding job. He's a father, he's a husband, he's a son, he's all the same things I am. And so I'm really fortunate to have the opportunity to chat through with him and reflect together. And I would say that's time invested in our relationship, which is one of my 3 things that is very important to me. But that is also a really important form of or way of reflecting.
Yeah, and I think it's incredibly important, especially as myself and Matt also, as we begin our young professional careers, just looking back at where we were even 1 year, 2 years ago, and seeing how far we've come, appreciating the journey that's gone on, and making sure that we're taking everything that we learned and applying it moving forward. But on the other side of things, we moving forward in your career, you're now naturally with the MLS, and it's very different than any other position you've had in your previous roles. One of the things that I read about a lot was how much you had to learn. Kind of tying it back to the last question, was how much you had to learn about not just the new company and the new staff and industry, but the sport itself, because it's unlike anything else. Can you touch on just kind of how exactly that learning process has gone? Because I know now it's been a number of months since you joined the company, and you've had a lot of time to learn so many things. Or I shouldn't say a lot of time, but such a small amount of time to learn so many things about this amazing sport. So what kind of approach were you taking to that, and how were you applying it to your everyday?
I'll say, if I'm honest, I'm at the beginning of my learning journey. I'm about 6 months in, and that sounds like a reasonable amount of time, but I have so much to learn, and I will be the first person to admit that. I'll say there are maybe 3 ways I've had the opportunity to learn. The first is I had the privilege of joining a fully functioning team. Like, we have a marketing team that's been creating great campaigns, building our brand, reaching consumers. They did that before me. And so I've had the opportunity to sit with those folks day in and day out and learn from them. And they've been so, so generous with their time. That has been the number one biggest driver of learning, the incredibly generous people on my team. The second is I also had the privilege of joining a company that had a fully functioning market research team. We have a ton of data. It's great. We have an incredibly talented research staff, and they also have done a lot of research. So sitting and reading and asking questions has been incredibly valuable. And then the last is watching soccer. Like, I'll be the first person to admit to you, the first soccer game I went to was the weekend before I started. And I was very open about that in the interview process too. There's no substitute for actually watching matches and in person, but also literally like on season pass, just sitting and watching. And I have a goal for myself to watch season pass 5 times a week, because again, there's no substitute for experiencing the product in different venues and forums. So for me, the learning's really just beginning, but tapping into the incredible people on my team, really looking at the data we have, and we're really lucky to have a strong research team that has good data, and then watching the sport, trying to immerse myself in it. Those are really the 3 biggest things for me.
Yeah. And I've certainly read about, of course, your consumer behavior background and your focus on that, and, truly being like a real subject matter expert on that side of marketing, and always following the data, looking at the data. Since you have come into the MLS, is there anything from the market research team that has surprised you? Maybe you weren't expecting the data to suggest this or imply that this is a form of consumer behavior that MLS fans might have. Is there anything that caught you off guard?
I don't know if there's anything that caught me off guard as much as simply because I didn't have a preconceived notion, right? Like, I didn't come in saying consumers of soccer, consumers of sport are going to be this way or that, because I literally never worked in the industry. And one thing that particularly academia teaches you to do is not have a made up or preconceived notion that's not based on data. So that's good. That was actually helpful. What I will say is we've spent a lot of time trying to understand What should we as Major League Soccer, what value should we be delivering to consumers? And two things in that stand out to me. Number one, it is very clear that we've got to be entertaining. People choose us because we're a way to pass the time in a positive, happy, fun, joyous, entertaining way. And we're an escape in some ways. And so we at MLS have to define what does that mean in a way that's uniquely ownable to us. And that's the journey we're on. And then the second thing I'll say is we've got to be fighting using marketing and using digital products each and every day to earn the right to be the entertainment option of choice for consumers. That's a really hard right to earn, given, I got about 1 million entertainment options right in this thing that I carry with me every day. So the idea that your competitive set is so broad is a really exciting and interesting challenge to tackle.
Definitely. And we've spoken a lot about that with folks from the club level of, some major markets like LA, New York that are fighting with other teams, even, LAFC and LA Galaxy being so close together, which isn't that common, but then having NBA, NHL, NFL all in the area. And then we've spoken with folks in other places where there aren't any other major league teams, but there's the beach, there's the outdoors, there's all these things that people might spend their weekend with. So
I think it's that.
Yeah, definitely.
Before you make the decision that you're going to spend your entertainment time on sports, you're choosing not Netflix, not the beach, not going for a hike, not whatever. And that array, that's like such a vast landscape of competitors. It's a really exciting problem to solve.
Yeah, definitely. And especially when it comes to any markets where sports might be expensive and there's other things that are inexpensive, to go and do with your family, especially, MLS very much caters to bringing the family, making it an experience. So families also like to go for hikes, go to the beach, whatever that might be. So that's definitely been a fun thing to ask people, how they contend with not just other sports, but everything that's not sports. Going back to, we sort of glossed over how you got into the league. So take us back to how did the opportunity come about? What did that process look like, in terms of what were you saying about yourself, maybe in your interviews that got the green light? And also on the flip side, to your point, you also were taking a risk of making a change. So what is it that stood out to you about this is a challenge that I want to tackle now?
So I'd say there are three things. First, the tailwinds behind the league were incredible and they're very public, right? Like as a person who wasn't necessarily job searching in the world of sports, the minute you think MLS, then in 2023 or 2024, you think Messi, you think World Cup, you think every child that when you walk down the street, they're wearing a soccer kit now. Hey, that's different than it was in the past. You just think growth. And for me, just the idea of working in a industry, in a business that was growing was really exciting. Second, I've spent time in the last, call it 10 years, working on products that are really important. How do you give people that don't have access to credit? How do you make sure children can get their medication? Really important problems. But those are also very polarizing topics. This isn't. So what a privilege to get to think about how do I market a product that is just about joy, fun, and in today's world about unity. This is a thing that brings people together. There are very few of those things out there. So that was the second thing. And then the third was when I actually went on the interviews, every person I met with was smart, was humble, was kind, and They were interested in my perspective on marketing. They were wanting to evolve how the league thinks about that discipline in that field. And that was exciting to me. So, huge tailwinds behind the league. The product is about joy and fun. And the people were great. As you think about considering an opportunity, there really are very few other things you could want, assuming all of the table stakes things like location and travel and all of that stuff is right.
Yeah. And I'm sure, of course, when we've spoken with people from clubs, some that are maybe they've been there from the beginning, we've spoken with people who've started clubs and people who've been in there employee number one, but they've gotten to experience a club from the beginning. You've come from, more recently in your career, sort of the startup field. Has it felt like a startup, even though you've come into the teams are there, the market research teams, everything you would build in a startup is somewhat already there for you, but because of the growth that is potentially ahead that, you might think of as a startup, we're here, but we can go here. Has it felt like that at all?
I think about it less as a startup because to your point, like the 0 to 1 is done, right? Like
Yeah.
in a startup, you really are, you're building process, you're building structure, you're building teams, etc. We have that. People have defined roles, etc. What I think about in this moment is this is the time when we go, and I'm using the wrong language, but like we can go from 1 to 10 or 10 to 100 or however you want to think about that. This isn't the 0 to 1 time. And I think that's actually a really exciting challenge. How do you rise to the occasion when the market is giving you the growth? How do you take the most advantage of that? How do you, and by the way, I think that's this, you do that with the same things we've been talking about. Hustle, grit, determination, right? There's no, you gotta work. There's no substitute for that. But calculated risk taking becomes really important, and people leadership becomes really important. And lastly, focus becomes really important. So same skills, right? We talked about my parents modeled those skills. So same skills that make you successful, hopefully in this kind of period in a business's history.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought back up the grit, the hard work. Anytime we've asked someone, maybe what do they look for when they are hiring for their teams, like what are the non-negotiables that someone needs to have beyond, again, the technical expertise, the background, but just you as a person joining this team, because again, we're people, things can be taught, but what is already ingrained in you. I guess now, as you're continuing to build your new team at the MLS, because the league, the sport is on this growth trajectory still, what are some of those, and maybe they are the things you've already said, but if there are any extras, the characteristics, the traits in people that you're looking for beyond just what their background is, what they're experts in, but actually who they are as people joining your team of people?
I'd actually say they're different qualities than we've talked about, and they're different at every level. So I think if you think about what you're looking for in a leader, that's very different from what you're looking for in someone that's like a manager level type person. In the phase of business where we are, we need leaders who have real expertise in the work they're doing. Full stop. They need to have done it before. They need to come with the how and the discipline of that. I don't think there's any substitute for that. We need leaders that can direct people with clarity so that you don't swirl your team. More importantly than that, though, I'm looking for people that are kind and focused on leading teams, right? Care about people, want to provide clarity, know how to do that job of leadership very intentionally and thoughtfully. I think that's not always the first thing people might look for when recruiting. I think that's the most important thing. We entrust our leaders with 2, 5, 10 people. And a leader can either make the most out of the time of those 2, 5, or 10 people, like whatever the number is, or you can really screw that up. And we've got to be hiring leaders who know how to be leaders. So that's in my opinion, it's like for the more senior people, you gotta know how to be a leader and you gotta have expertise in your field or discipline. For folks that are more junior, it is a lot of that, like hustle, grit, determination, eagerness, willingness to learn, no job is too small, etc. And I think that's a really interesting bifurcation. But I think you have to be very clear on if you're hiring for a more junior level, the idea that someone wants to learn and is excited about it is the most important thing. I don't expect someone with 3 years of work experience to come in with like expertise in a field, but I expect them to want to build it. So leaders have expertise and they know how to lead, and folks that are more junior are just excited to be here and want to learn and want to put in the time.
That's great. And that makes a lot of sense, that the grit, the hard work side of things is, you get to earn through all of that, maybe into those leadership roles, but at the beginning it's, you have to work, you have to put in the work. And that's been a big theme of, especially when we've spoken with other people in the marketing side, the revenue side of things. Earl Martinez at LA Galaxy, that was like his biggest thing was, if you're coming here, you have to work. Like it's no day off, in terms of like, you can't just go through the motions the same way you would, when you think about sports, going through the motions of the warm-up. You can't, you have to be intentional. We can't, of course, have you on, and you've brought up the name, the mythical sort of legend of Lionel Messi. Given you're only, 6 months in, and he's sort of, been here for a bit already, still has some time to go in the league, can you discuss just sort of the short-term and long-term impacts that him being in the league has had for the league's marketing strategies, its brand equity? He's definitely, I'm sure, played a big part in this recent real big spike, in the last 1 to 2 years. But can you just touch from the inside, what that looks like in terms of how, you don't craft it all around him, but how he fits into the jigsaw puzzle that is, running marketing for a professional sports league?
Absolutely. Listen, we are so fortunate that icons, right? And there's no other way of saying this. Like Messi is a global icon, and we have global icons like Messi, others who choose to spend their time at MLS. We're really lucky that we have those folks within our teams, within the league, because what that does from a marketing perspective is that drives huge awareness for us. If you think about the goal of marketers, it's to drive awareness and then to convert that awareness into some kind of action, right? Think about a classic marketing funnel. And having these incredible global icons, these unmatched stars, they drive that top of funnel awareness like nothing else. But awareness is a flash in the pan. It's literally lost in seconds if you don't do something as a marketing team to harness it. And that's where our teams come in, both the league marketing team, but also our club marketing teams, who have the benefit of having these stars on their teams. Marketers turn that awareness into consideration and into conversion with really focused plans to drive that conversion. We think about every day, how do we take this amazing awareness that our players gift to us and nurture fans? How do we send them the right content at the right time through the right channel so that that awareness turns into consideration, right? They start to read about us. They start to watch videos about us. They follow us on social. How do we make sure that content is exactly the right thing to get them interested and engaged? And then when is the right time to say, buy a jersey, sign up for season pass, buy a ticket, right? In a way that is not obnoxious. When we have earned the right to have that conversation because we've provided enough value. So these icons are the first step in that marketing funnel for some consumers because they drive that awareness. And then it's our job to turn that awareness into action.
That's also been something we've heard from the club level is, it's not all about one player. It's how can you leverage having the player when you do have them, because it's, it's not Messi being at Barcelona for so many years. You sort of have this more finite time with these icons that like you need to take advantage of their time. But looking ahead, and we've mentioned, World Cup is coming up very quickly. There's tournaments coming. Messi is still in the league moving forward. when it comes to harnessing the attention that has come very recently, that will come within the next couple of years, I guess, any sort of tactical insight that you can share, or just overview of what does that look like, for the next 5-10 years of everything that's happening right now, everything that's about to happen. How do we make sure that it's not just, a sizzle for a few years, but it really helps in this real rocket sort of ship that might be coming up?
I'm a big believer in full funnel marketing. And I think without it, even when you have these incredible world-class moments like the World Cup, if you don't have full funnel marketing, you don't take full advantage and you don't win. And so for us, the next 5 years are about exactly that. We have to build our brand. We have to. We have to reach new populations of people and get them to both have awareness, but then also consider us. Then we have to get their fan record, right? We have to have first-party relationships with consumers. Then we have to be able to nurture those relationships. Again, give them stuff that they're interested in. Content, video, social, sweepstakes, whatever the things are. And we've got to be able to do that repeatedly in the way that those consumers want. Right message, right channel, right customer, right time. This is like nuts and bolts of marketing, right? And then we have to earn the right to say, okay, buy something from us. I think that piece is really, really important. Consumers are very turned off by the idea that we might just say, buy a jersey, buy a jersey, buy a jersey. Like, that's not the relationship they want with us. The relationship they want with us is us being able to provide them with content that's interesting, that helps them learn about their favorite player, their favorite club, the sport, upcoming activities. And then when the time is right and it's natural and it makes sense in the conversation, right? The one-on-one conversation that we are having with consumers through our own channels, that's when we say, buy a jersey, buy a ticket, sign up for a season pass. So for me, the next 5 years are going to be about what the team has done so well in the last 5 years, and that is full funnel marketing. Start with awareness, nurture fans, drive conversion. That is a formula that remains unchanged.
Yeah, and I've been a fan of the league almost since I started life, way back when I was really, really young. So it's really cool to see how far the league has grown, not just from when I have memories of it back in 2004, 2005, but even just pre-pandemic to now. The league itself has done an incredible job. And like we were just talking about the World Cup and Messi being here, I can't imagine what it's going to look like in 2 to 3 years from now. And that's what I wanted to ask you about is we've said and we've mentioned that you're joining the league at such kind of an explosive time in its growth, or potentially explosive time in its growth, with Messi's presence, with the World Cup, and not to forget about it, but the Gold Cup coming here next year as well. As someone who's new to the sport and new to the industry, soccer industry, obviously not marketing, how excited are you on both the personal side as a fan and someone learning the sport, and also as a marketing professional, for the potentials that are gonna happen in the next few years?
I mean, I couldn't be more excited. There's no other way to answer that question. And they kind of combine together, right? As a person, I'm just excited about the growth and the learning. Like, what, to your point, what an incredible time to have the privilege to be part of this sport. As a CMO, I'm just excited about how we can take change happening in the realm or the field of marketing and apply it in literally the biggest moment in the sport's history. So how do we think about things like increased use of data and AI, and create personalized experiences, use predictive analytics? There's something really cool in applying that trend to the biggest moment in sports history. How do you take this idea of fans requiring and needing engagement beyond the match and make sure we build that ahead of the World Cup? Experiential marketing, fan loyalty programs. How do we think about how the media landscape is changing and make sure that we are capturing that opportunity ahead of and during the World Cup. So I think there's just, I'm very personally and professionally excited about the learning and the opportunity to think about these changes in consumer behavior and how we might be able to, as a league, apply them to take advantage of this incredible moment ahead of us.
Yeah, I know we're definitely on the personally excited to see it and be a fan of everything going on. I'm even more excited to know you now and know the person sort of behind, leading the charge of that growth. So definitely excited on all ends ourselves as well. So before we wrap up, and I know we mentioned earlier, self-reflection, not always having the time to sort of time block it and schedule it and really, sit with yourself. Let's do that for a quick second right now of looking backwards. Obviously, you are where you are in your career now, and very confident that there are so many great things to come moving forward for you as well. But looking backwards, whether it's career, personal life, whatever it might be, what is one thing that you have done, one thing you've gone through that you are most proud of yourself for? Not a collective you may be a part of, but you, Radhika, that you have done, can you be most proud of?
I'll say two things, and they might be unlikely answers because they're not necessarily accomplishments in the way you would think about it. The first is choosing the right partner and working every day to make sure that that relationship and partnership stays strong. I think this is this may be a thing that is very applicable to women, maybe more so than others, but picking the right partner and working in that relationship has literally been the key to my professional success, because he's there every day telling me not to quit, telling me he'll help, and he does. And then the second thing I'll say is, outside of that, I don't think it's about the actual accomplishments, like great campaign, you win an award, whatever. I don't think it's about those things. I think, again, you never remember what you did. You remember how you felt. And so for me, the thing I try to do is make sure in any moment, good or bad, that people on my team feel a certain way. And that means I have to act with genuine care for them. And I try to be really intentional about, no matter what the accomplishment is, doesn't matter. It just matters how we got there. And we have to get there with genuine care for each other.
Definitely that impact that you leave on people is much more important than anything you have brought to life in terms of a campaign and execution. It is, people don't remember you for the things you had. People remember you for the way you made them feel. That's a great point, and I think a great note to end on. So, Radhika, thank you so much for firstly your time, but of course your insights. It's been amazing to learn from you today, hear your journey, how you got to where you are now, and of course you're pretty early in the journey of the MLS, but knowing everything about you now and everything that is coming up for the sport, I'm extremely excited that you are sort of leading the charge when it comes to taking us as fans and people just interested in the industry on the pitch and off the pitch. Extremely excited to see what you're going to be able to make happen, and know that the leader that you are is driving that forward. So thank you for everything today and everything that I'm sure you're going to bring to life moving forward for the sport.
Thank you so much for saying that and for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Radhika.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on. See you in the next one.